clean drip lines, right? Especially if you're starting to incorporate something like HyClean, which is a very good chelating agent. It's an organic line cleaner, and it's going to keep your organics alive, most importantly, while keeping your drip lines clean. Kev, let's start off with that. Like, what is something to consider with implementing HyClean to make sure that your lines are clean?
Yeah, so being that HyClean is a chelating agent, something you're going to want to start first, like your day one of your room. That way your lines are clean. Any residual buildup in the lines will be pulled out prior to HyClean. You don't want those being pulled out on day 1 or day 14, day 20, because although that will end up in your plant and it's gonna create an out of balance nutrient ratio or whatever's in there. Who knows? It could pull out pathogens. It could pull out other things that are in there that you don't want. So it's really best to start from day one.
From day one, right? So what if somebody just decides that they want to do it mid-round, right? So do you do a line hold? How would you implement that?
It would be best if you had flush valves. You had your facility was set up to do a flush up to the plants. Would be the bare minimum. The other thing you could also do a flush at a PSI lower than your emitters allow. So if your emitters are at 19 PSI, you could flush at a 16, 17, 10, and whatever it is, you'd require a pressure regulator to do that, and then you could flush out your lines that way.
Okay, so that's big because a lot of people are very curious about how to blast organics to your drip lines. Some of the key essentials are flush valves. And when Omar came through from Riverless, he was really he was emphasizing the pressure from the stock tank all the way through. Can you touch a little bit about that and just some considerations of how people should consider upgrading their lines for that?
Yeah, so generally speaking, regardless if you're running Synganics, I think there's best practices in your line and in managing your line. So typically it's varying sets of flush valves and pressure regulators that you can control your maintenance, say your filter changes. So if you have pressure regulators, at your filter and then at the end of your line, you'll be able to see if those filters get clogged when you fire up those lines. And then flush valves intermittently in between there. One at the end, I like one pre-rack, and then one post-filters, pre-filters. So I really prefer 3 of them in your room. It'd be that's optimal. It's not 100% necessary, but it makes the system, you can manage the system the best.
Now, something that I'm not sure if everybody got a chance to see the system over here, but shout out to Cairospace, Jeremy. This ag pack is incredible because dissolved oxygen is something that not a lot of people have considered to implement at scale, but it's something that we are absolutely stoked to have. So Jeremy, thank you for the support, because dissolved oxygen is also something that keeps your lines clean. And part of the science behind the ag pack is more coverage, right? We're trying to create higher CFUs with the Synganics and brewing the tea and being able to distribute those organics to the plants. Kev, touch a little bit on where you see dissolved oxygen helping the whole Synganic program.
Yeah, so the dissolved oxygen basically creates a greater surface area of water, and that's like the goal of it. And so we all know if you're going to brew and you're going to multiply microbes, you need oxygen to do that. And to dissolve oxygen with an air stone, you're really not getting the proper dissolved rate as what you need. Really, the surface tension is where the dissolved oxygen is coming from. The bubbles coming up they're too large to really create the dissolved oxygen that the compost tea would need, which is why if you're familiar with aerated activated compost tea, it's usually an airlift system, and that's because the surface tension is being broken and kind of that churning effect, just like what would happen in the mountain stream. That's why the dissolved oxygen is so high up there. So being able to suspend oxygen in solution, it kind of it's a faster way to get that rate high. And so the Cairospace, their nanotechnology allows for that, and so it allows for the greater surface area in the water that then will help dispersion of both salts and then the population of the microbes to be able to increase without any supplemental oxygen. So if you're doing a 24-hour brew, you're not necessarily you don't need to put air stones in though. The dissolved oxygen is already there. Then it also feeds your system, your whatever substrate you're in. It routinely gets a replenishment. So you'll have less die off per se. And this is something we're gonna test over the next year or so.
That's one of the cooler things. Like, we want to explore CFU counts, right? So how much of the organics are surviving, and what is the proper DO range, right, Jeremy? I know we talked about 16 to 18 being the optimal range of dissolved oxygen for the plant nutrient uptake, but what about with CFU counts in Synganics? Do we need to lower that DO, right? Are we creating too much competition with those microbes when we start increasing it, or we might need to decrease it to let them do their thing?
Yep. So we'll have those answers, hopefully shortly.
Cool. And last plug for Chirospace, because this is also super cool and nerding out, is injection of gases, right? So what are some of those things that we can potentially inject in the gas for the benefits of what?
Yeah, well, what we're talking about, obviously CO2. We have a misting fog coat system coming, so we're going to experiment with that, as well as there's all kinds of other gases. I'm a big fan of calcium, so I've been trying to figure out a way to get calcium in the water on a regular basis. So that's a work in progress, I think.
Yeah. A lot of cool science behind that. So looking forward to that one. So Kev, let's talk about the weekly inoculant, because when people, brewing teas isn't something new, but the combination of products that you've put together from the AgPro All-in-One, which you've helped co-develop with the lactose-based carrying agent to make sure that it's not talc-based to clog up your lines. From that solution to the Green Grow Green Aminos to the High Shield, all this stuff, full power. Talk a little bit about what each of these things that you put into the brew, so that you can go from the inoculant to the foliar, and when do you stop the foliar?
So a bit of history. For me, I've always been a Synganic, grower. Never really called it that, but that's what I did. And I always kind of dove into the microbial world long ago in making compost teas. And I have a huge garden at my house as well. So it wasn't just for cannabis. It was for fruit trees and my annual garden, and so I would do big batches with an airlift, and different inputs from insect frass to different guanos and so forth. So when I started growing commercially, 6 or 7 years ago, it was something I wanted to be able to include because I'd always included it in everything I've grown, and for flavor and just general plant immunity and be able to as like an insurance policy, to be able to trust what I'm doing. If something fails, it kind of gives you a little bit of leeway to have a base, a plant immunity base that to build on. And so it kind of started with, it started all over the map really to figure out where to go in a commercial state and put it through drip emitters, because I was growing in a large facility that I was not capable of hand watering all the plants there, so it had to be something I could put through emitters, which most people freak out when you say I blast organics through emitters. So it started with finding the most soluble forms, which led me to Green Grow. The green aminos right off the bat is 100% soluble, and so that was my first step. And that product, if you're going to add any product to your garden, I would rank as probably the highest, because it has a multitude of ingredients that affect plant health. It has two forms of calcium. It has kelp. It has seaweed. It has the aminos from a protein hydrosalate, and as well as it has some azose in there. And so I started there, and then that doesn't really get you the microbes. So I was using TerraGrow for a while from BioSafe, which is a great product. I had to do some filtering with that. Generally, it was pretty good. It wasn't as diverse as I would probably want, and so I went to to the Green Grow all-in-one, which is pretty similar to the Ag Pro, but it did not allow for, it was not flowable. So it had a zeolite carrier, which is basically like a silica glass carrier, and so I had to filter it out. And so I talking to Kevin Vu and Mark from Green Grow, I'm like, hey, can we get this? How can I get this? This is a nightmare. I know there's, lactose in green aminos is flowable. And they're like, yeah, sure. We'll do that, and we'll add a few more microbes in there for you that I wanted. And so that was where the all-in-one came about. Started blasting it through the emitters with those. Just those two products to start. I was also using a chitosan product that was not hygrozyme based. I got it from a secondary market, and got the ratios of that. And chitosan triggers a SAR response in plants. So the plant thinks it's being attacked, builds up the plant immunity, specifically more for fungal pathogens. So if you have PM or bud rot, even maybe a little fusarium, it's going to help with that. So that was kind of the initial combo, and then I built on from there. That's the inoculant based. For a foliar, the Green Grow green aminos is like the one ad. I was using a kelp foliar previous in secondary calcium, and when I found that product, everything it had in it, it's kind of a one-stop shop. So if you're trying to minimize your work in foliar feeding, it's the best route I've found to get the most out of your time. And so I went to the green aminos, and I'm still a big fan of calcium, so I still spray amino chelated calcium, and I've used a multitude of products from metal salate to Biomin. And BioAg has a great one that is actually a little more cost effective, cost conscious than those, and a little more available. That's the Calmino. And so I foliar that once a week. I have a few different products, and it's part of the program, and then the green aminos on a separate day. I tend to prefer to use my biostimulants like your kelps one day a week. So I tend to do that on one day and have other products on other days.
When do you stop spraying foliars?
Usually about day 18. Depends on the plant stage. Some plants are a little more developed at that, like the LCG times Z in room 1 it looks like it's a few days further along. But generally about 16 to 18. And I usually don't foliar past that period unless I absolutely have to.
What about in the clone room? Do you do a dunk? Do you do foliar? What do you do in the clone room?
So clone room, they get pretty much the same program. The veg gets the same program as all the flower rooms up to day 18. But I'm a big fan of dunking plants generally. I should say dipping plants. So as far as like an IPM protocol, if you touch the plant, you dip the plant. It's minimized. You're already touching it, so your labor's already there. It's not much more work to flip it upside down. We generally don't deal with pests due to that. So you handle a plant twice. You transplant the clone into the initial block, 4x4 by 2.5. It gets dipped. Then that block then gets moved to the final stage in the flower room and gets dipped again. So in the course of over 2 weeks, it gets two IPM dips, and it's worked pretty well for almost all pests.
For sure. And what does that IPM dip look like?
Currently we're using Hygro Punch by Hygrozyme, and then I use an azidoractin product. There's multiples, typically the highest, all the azidactin extracts the same, so whatever gives you the highest percentage at the cheapest price for the most part.
for the Hygro Punch, what mils per gallon are you using?
The mils per gallon, it's usually for the spray is at 30, and I prefer to go a lot lower on the dip. So the dip is going to be somewhere from a 5 to 10 is where we would go. Generally, the reason why oils, and you got to be careful with oils, is you get separation at the surface. So if you get that separation, and water and oil don't mix, and so if you dunk it up, I always dip with a mixing pump. You don't have to, but the suspension is a little bit more uniform, and I've gotten pretty significant burn with you get that layer of oil on the top if it's not properly mixed, and then you dip the plant, and you can just see it almost melt. It doesn't happen all the time. It happens enough though that it's especially if you have a lot of people working, you have a big facility, and things weren't mixed right or they're not being mixed. It's easier just to put a mixing pump in there and ensure it's mixed.
If you touch the plant, you dip the plant.
Yep.
I like that. The labor's already there. You're already touching the plant, so just make sure that you're doing your dips. That's great.
Yep. Yeah, and then generally that same weekly inoculant gets into the root zone at clone. So just literally dump it right in the clone trays, and then usually it's charged in the cocoa or the media in the room on the second plant. So both times you dip, you're also inoculating. So you're kind of going, one side for pests, one side for microbes.
So the recipe is evolving, right? There's always going to be solutions coming in, maybe coming out. Maybe you find a different solution to include in there. And if you guys are following along on the Instagram page or the website, like scan the QR code, all this information is on there, guys. So if you have a curiosity around the feed chart or anything that we are working on, everything is available. And that's the cool thing about PowrHouse is like we're here to provide information. We're here to trial and challenge everything that we've got going on. And if there's a different solution that you guys have, we're here to hear it. So,
yeah, I hate the term master grower. It really bothers me because, there's so much to learn. And with that, there's all kinds of new things, new ideas and ways to push the industry and general farming, not just cannabis, but we're pushing general farming every day by doing what we're doing here. So that's, I hate it because, there's so much to learn, and we all always learn every day.
People ask why our name is misspelled, and that's because we're never perfect. We're missing the E because we're constantly improving and we're never perfect. So any ego that comes into this room, you can check yourself right out because that's not the place. This is a place for collaboration and innovation to basically grow better, clean cannabis. So, Kev, let's move on to Q&A, man. Like we can talk all day long as we normally do. And again, I'm still pinching myself that this is happening, bro.
Yeah, for real.
It's amazing. So guys, again, thank you. Like you're literally living in a part of our dream that we've talked about for years. And Kevin and I go back, when you guys were first building out Delighted in 2019 is when we first met. And, Kevin was one of the first guys that candidly told me that I had HLV in my plants because I started a nursery called Cultivated. And the way that Kevin approached me about having a problem, I'm like, damn, this guy is a pro. He brought a severe issue to me in a very professional manner. And that's when I knew that there were some good people in this space that I can really learn from and collaborate with, and to be here sitting with you today, Kev, is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, it is surreal. We talk about it all the time. If you know me, I love to chat about growing. It's like one of my favorite things to do. So to be able to do it with a variety of people I don't know, it's really, really, I feel grateful. So
extremely grateful, extremely blessed, especially with our manufacturing partners, the PowrBrands. Everybody that showed up here to support us on this date, that invested into this brand, this facility. This is incredible that we have access to world-class manufacturers and innovators that we can give candid feedback to for the process of good and better improvement. So again, we kind of talked about this earlier, is Six Sigma, right? We want to continuously improve and manufacture better innovative solutions. So again, thank you guys for being here and to be a part of this journey with us. Let's open up for Q&A. Was there anything that you guys saw throughout the room about the inoculant, about the foliar, any solutions that you guys would like to open up with? Yes, sir. I'm going to come over here with the mic.
It's going to get tricky with the fire.
Or if you'd like to come up and take a seat, man. By all means, why not? Name and where you're from, sir.
All right, so my name is Joe Cunliffe, and I'm with Natura. So you mentioned the dip. I'm a big fan of dips. It really gets in all the nooks and crannies and everything. One of my concerns, though, is always actually spreading things through the dip. So is that a concern of yours? And if so, how do you manage that concern?
So you're mixing, you could be dipping 1,000 plants in the same dip. And when I first started doing that commercially, I was concerned about that. And so, however, specifically like HLV, it was my concern. But I did not see really any spread from that, not to the magnitude as you would expect. Because if you're using the same dip, you would, in theory, it would spread a lot faster that way. I never saw that. And in addition to that, there's other clean practices too. You should be doing if you are not necessarily with a dip, but you could do small batches, things like that. That could minimize that, and also changing that dip. If it gets nasty, let's make a secondary bucket or whatever you're using the dip with.
And to piggyback on that, dissolved oxygen. I think that's one of the things that's going to help separate any sort of pathogenic pressure within the water or of the dip itself. And again, this is what really caught my attention when I started talking to Jeremy, was like how long the DO suspends and actually stays active in there. So, but again, I have that same concern, right? Especially operating a nursery. Like, this is something that we're always talking about. Treat each plant like it's infected. So when we're starting to share a dip, what does that best practice look like? And it's a great question. We still don't have the solve for that, but at least at this point, we're putting in inoculants to help hopefully prevent any sort of pathogens.
Yeah, and I think, pathogen itself, depending on what the dip's made of, obviously HLV, it would be my biggest concern. Most of the oil is going to, do a good number on, a fusarium or a pythium, but HLV would be what I would be concerned with. You think about what you're dipping, you're also dipping plants that you're flowering. So you're minimizing, it wouldn't be great to spread it, but you're also doing it at the plant phase that is the least important for spread. Where obviously, if the biggest concern is your moms,
right.
And you're in anything that could turn into a mom. So.
And some general mom stock practices, right? Anytime you're introducing plants, full panel, whether it's HLV plus all the several other fungal and pathogen pressure opportunities there. And then once a month, we're testing our moms. Just pretty standard practices. Shout out to my Flora, because you guys have a fantastic testing platform. $9 an HLV sample. Thank you, guys. But yeah, that's one of the things is like we don't have our moms for more than 3 months at most. And I think we're going to probably test out some other theories too with just shorter shrubs, maybe the clone and go even in some rooms. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point that you need other common sense practices in place. Where if you're dipping all of your plants and they all have HLVD, yeah, maybe that's a bad idea, but why do your plants all have them in the first place, right? So there need to be other common sense things in place that the plants you're dipping aren't so dirty that it's a problem, right?
Yeah, and it really comes back to, your cloning practices. Because if you're doing in-house clones, they all start there. So, we have a pretty rigorous cloning separation and how you minimize that cross-contamination in the cloning in the moms. So you start there, and then, hopefully you end good. But we all know that HLV is everywhere. So yeah, you got to have the clean practices.
Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
My man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great question. And you guys are already doing inoculations at scale, right? You guys already have your wanding in the inoculants. Is that correct? You guys are already inoculating, hand watering in, right? Okay. Yeah. And, part of that process too is, I'm also curious about the wand itself. Like, I know, Tony, we were talking about that U-shaped shower head, right? If you just kind of put it around the stalk of the plant and shower it down, because like a lot of times the shower's too much and it's just going to probably blast through.
Yeah, and I mean, depending on what you're wanding too, even the shower head nozzle, it's it can affect flow. Dispersion's great, but it especially when you're running like Faven lights, things like that, you're trying to minimize your splash, because if we're inoculating, if you're inoculating with a hose all the way up to day, week 7, day 42, 49. I usually go all the way up to week 8. I just kind of leave week 8 out of it. Depending on what your room is too, my experience is a lot of times I'll harvest over the whole week. So, to kind of universify everything, I usually stop at about week 8. But you really trying to keep that inoculant off the Favens, because it sucks to have to, rinse those off or wipe them down after. So. For sure.
What other questions? Anything about any of the rooms? Yes, sir.
talk a little bit about the checkerboard lighting and where you see the evolution of that going? Because I know the industry is all about LEDs lately, and so it seems like a little bit of a looking back retrospective.
Nice. Great question. Go ahead, Kev.
Yeah, it is. I think it kind of gives you the ideas. It gives you the best of both worlds. The radiant heat off of the HPS, high, really high lumen or projection, or not just a high lumen, high PBFD projection, and generally the more orangish red spectrum in the 600s. So mixed with a full spectrum LED. So it is looking back. I think it's interesting for me because it's been a long time since I've grown HPS. So I haven't been accustomed to doing it. So I'm most excited about it. But as far as the future goes, that's also tough too, because in some jurisdictions like here you can't run HPS. New builds you can't run HPS, so you have to already be grandfathered into a build that was permitted with HPS. So there's limitations. I can't speak to other states, but generally, there's limitations there.
And I'm blown away with the growth and the vigor compared to a room right next to it that was 10 days behind. I mean, it looked like it was at least a week ahead of where it should be. Like that room 2 was at day 30, which looked like it was at day, I don't know, man. What do you think? Like, it looked like it was a full week ahead.
Yeah. I think right now it's kind of, my opinion is kind of evened out. I see it every day. Like 3 days ago, I was like, holy shit, it does look like a week. And, now it's swelling. The stack is there, and now it's swelling. And so it's a little less noticeable for me, but it is very impressive, especially the size of those buds, because they're going to be forearms when they're done.
Right. Now, talk a little bit about the defoliation of the room, because it was dense, right? Shout out to the crew that's been plucking in there, because it's a lot of work. Definitely a lot of work with big plants like that.
Yeah, definitely not what I was used to. That was my standard. My standard defoliation method did not work. We had to go in a second time, just because the plants were so high and they were so bushy. The plant density is a little bit much. They were over veg too, so that was a factor. But we actually had to go in there and pull out branches out of the trellis and pull them on the sides. We lit the room rather than the tray, so I just gave everything more surface area in the last couple days. And twine the sides instead of everything cramped in the trellis. And so that helps the airflow a lot, and as well as pulling out leaves.
Yeah, I commend you, Kev, because you guys added in that twine on the side to let the branches kind of tip off, because you're right, we lit the entire room, not just the aisles. And that was cool to see, because now the plant's widening out. It's getting a lot more lumens all the way throughout that penetration, especially with the R6 and the R8 fave and under canopy lights in there. That we checkerboarded those too. I don't know if you guys noticed this spectrum difference, but the R6 and the R8 were matching the top spectrum on the top lights. So pretty cool to see that. Great question about that, because we're fascinated by the checkerboard room. And
the percentage that they're at right now?
The percentage of intensity on the lights?
Yeah, so for spectrum, as most people know, it's not great to have dimmed HPS, but I was seeing some mostly yellowing around the HPS lights. Well, let me back up. When we first threw them in there, it was a challenge because we have a lot lower PPFD in our veg room. So I had them raised up as high as they could go and as dim as they could go, and they were still almost twice the PPFD. So it took some transition to get those lights in there comfortably and the plants not stressed out. And so when we where it ended in early flower, those LEDs are at about 100% and they're 1200 watts, and the HPS right now are at 85 or 88%. So they're not even fully turned up, and that's to get the most even PPFD in the room. So, and we're running about 1200 PPFD in there right now. But if I were to raise up those HPS, I would have hot and cold areas of PPFD, so I have them dimmed a little bit.
Great question. Thank you. What other questions you guys have? Anything about the cleanliness? I don't know if you guys talked to or got much experience with the Dram Auto Fog. I know we keep bringing this thing up, but cleanliness is one of the biggest things that I love to focus on, especially when we're talking about room resets. And Kev, if you can briefly touch on the PAA 15 and just a little bit about how our practices with the auto fog are.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, we're kind of all about minimizing labor. You have a big facility. Anytime you can, combine products, reduce steps and touch points is what you want to do. And so I started using the auto fog previously in the large facility I was working at, and it's a game changer for all foliar application. I shouldn't say. Let me back up. Not all foliar application. Non-oil based foliar applications and sanitation. Which sanitation is what I've used it the most for, because you get in every nook and cranny in that room. The auto fog, it's a dry fog, sub 5 micron. So you use a product like a PAA product, periacetic acid, like the AgPro has one that's 15%. Sanidate does too. You can use a 5%, whatever you want to do. To me, the higher the better in the sense of sanitation in the room. There's no plants in there. So if you're doing it with, it's a post-harvest sanitation, you can do it, a pretty high rate, and it's a dry fog, so you don't have rusting. It doesn't break down, doesn't oxidize your metals. If you were to spray Sanidate on those metal surfaces, they will rust. Since it's a dry fog, it kills on contact, so any mold spores, things that are in that room, it'll decimate them. And so you talk about Fusarium, Pythium, Aspergillus, things like that. So it's a ratio of what the autofog is done with a ratio of what a foliar application to runoff would be. And so that's how they describe it, and so it's a percentage of what that what that foliar application would be based on the square footage. And so you just load up the PAA in there, and you can apply it with nobody in there, which is, you would never want to be in that room with any PAA products that are fogged. So and it's usually about roughly a 2 hour fog time, and if you have your system on controls, you can kind of modulate your controls. Turn off your HVAC first, turn on your dehues for a while, and shut off the dehues. Turn on your fans, depending on what your control systems allow, and you can kind of sanitize all parts of your room. And then I usually just let it build up in that room after all those controls have been ran through. So let it build up, and it just kind of covers every nook and cranny, and it really it covers more than you think. A little backstory is when I first started using it, I was like, man, this thing's not working. I can't see anything. And so one of the reps at Dram was like, oh, go get a laser. And so I put water in there, and I put the laser. I went in the room and had a blast for a half an hour. And I turned on the laser, and it looked like a foggy day on the coast, went through that laser. I was like, okay, it is working. And but generally the micron size is so small that you don't really see it, especially with something like that's very water-based, like a PAA, or if it doesn't have any color. One thing I will say: do not put regalia through a fogger.
Why is that?
It makes the room look like a murder scene. Because regalia, if you use regalia, it's red. Yeah. And you turn off different controls there, everything turns red. It literally looks like you threw somebody through like a wood chipper.
So we keep talking about workflow savings, Kevin, and that's why the Dram Auto Fog keeps coming up, right? So we've talked about room resets for cleanliness, but what about for foliar applications?
Yeah. So most of your non-oil based, like pesticides, suffocants kill by suffocating. So your Tritech, Sufoil, Hydro Punch, things like that, you're going to get minimal efficacy with that. So, but your microbial, and I haven't got in depth with the different microbes and how that would play in, but like your calciums, even like if you were to use like a pyganic, any sort of contact killer works. Just suffocants are where I kind of draw the line in using them.
Okay, so that makes sense. That's why you wouldn't want to use an oil base, because you want it to actually cover and smother the pest.
It's a dry fog, so.
Okay, so the oil turning into a dry fog, hitting a pest won't.
And the micron size is so small, so sometimes you got to watch the efficacy of a product too, because it could end up in even though it's a ratio of what should be applied, you really want to test go quarter strength with it, because everything winds up in that stomata a little more effectively. So it's something that you do not use full strength what you normally foliar feed.
Great. What other questions do you guys have? Any first timers that want to incorporate the Synganics? Any curiosities that are looming? Yes, sir. Come on. Welcome back.
Thank you. All right, so second question here. A lot of the Synganic type additives.
Bring up a little bit right here.
A lot of these Synganic type additives are liquids, and obviously liquids have some drip issues with them. What do you know about mixing in dry ingredients into soil and just adding your regular, A/B mix on top of that?
You talking like a drip feed with an A and a B?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about adding the organic aspect of it straight into the soil. Instead of trying to put
like a top dress, like sprinkle it in on the top and then irrigate after,
or even mixing it straight into the soil on a soil mixing line. The idea being that I'd only want to put A and B straight salts through a dripper, but then put all the extra benefit stuff straight into the soil in a dry ingredient. So instead of using a liquid chitosan, using ground crab shell meal. Do you know anything about that? Have you ever tried anything like that?
Not quantitatively, but definitely I think there's multiple ways to do it, and that way would absolutely work when it comes to microbes. I think like crab meal, things like that, I don't know the breakdown that it would actually end up in a chitosan. That would take probably some rate, figuring out quantitatively ratios on how to apply that at the right amount to have that occur. But generally microbes, then the only thing you would probably want to do is make sure you have a food source for those microbes. Mm-hmm. So if you're mixing them in the soil, then you're going to want to be able to either inject some have additional food source to make sure those microbes are actually surviving over that length of time. With the inoculant, they have a food source, so they're kind of getting, it's almost like getting a new home every week or two, however you want to do it. And so you're going to have, that mix in there, and constantly having a salt-based nutrient in there. You're definitely going to have some degradation without food. So that would be, that would be my number one concern with doing that. But if you found a food source, either sprinkle on, water in, that would be good, easy to do too.
And that's a constant debate, right? The living soil cultivators, the organic growers, like they're always saying, well, you're just killing off all your microbes, right? When we're doing it the way that we're doing. But, at the end of the day, we are increasing whatever CFU coverage than nothing, right? I think there's always that net positive when you're putting this in. And that's a great question, because we've toyed around with, hey, what if we had a dry pack of inoculant in our compressed cocoa block or something, or our rock wool? Like, what happens at that point? But Kev, you bring up a good point about like the microbes having food, right? So having that weekly re-inoculation does have that added benefit of just constantly giving them the food. And that's something from Green Grow that they have. Was it the Nature's Bricks?
Yeah, the bricks. Yeah, and so it's a good food source. And you could probably find something that's flowable. I don't think Nature's Bricks is flowable through. It's more of a compost. I put it in when I brew the microbes, not necessarily in the inoculant itself. So, but there's plenty of flowable. You can probably inject a molasses base or some other sugary based product and get a similar result, and be able to feed those microbes.
Yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, we're not growing microbes, right? We're growing cannabis flowers. So who cares if some microbes die if it lets the cannabis flowers grow?
Well,
Yeah.
and most of these microbes, are the high salinity does not bother them as much as everybody else would think. And there's plenty of white papers, and you talk to somebody like Mark that as part owner of Coast Bio that develops microbes. Your standard microbes that are in most of your blends are used to being at a high salt content. They're not, and they're also used to being in an aqueous solution. And some of them are cultured in an aqueous solution. So it's a lot of people think that all that is going to kill them all, and it does not. It doesn't do that. It's just more about keeping them alive and having the right amount of food for them and keep the diversity there, which is a bigger question mark of what's actually there over time than is it surviving. There's competition and micro diversity of micro food and things like that can outcompete one another.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great question. Thank you. What other questions do you guys have? Mr. Jones.
Anthony always has a question.
Can you describe some scenarios where you might use the 5-inch versus the 6-inch in Kaya and why you're using the different ones?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, definitely. So first of all, that's really a loaded question. Yeah, I could go a lot of different directions there. Really depends. First of all, I would say what your irrigation system allows. If you're hand watering, you're not going to probably want to be in a 5-inch. You're going to want a bigger substrate. If you if you have a full-on irrigation system and you can, like say open sprinkler, you can irrigate whenever you want, then I would base it on your plant height and a little bit of your irrigation experience too. The 5-inch, you have less flexibility in the survival of the plant. So if it's something that you don't have a good monitoring system, or you don't trust your team, or you're not sure what you're doing, it might be better to have a little more flexibility and go with a 6-inch over a 5-inch. But it's almost like a racetrack. If you're not used to driving a race car, you probably you don't want a 5-inch, which is a 5-inch smaller substrate. It's like a race car. You can pull the levers and you can control the grafts a little bit better, but there's a lot of risk because you don't have a lot of time. The temporary wilting point of the plant will happen a lot sooner in a smaller substrate if you're growing big plants. So if you're planning on growing, like the room 1 double stack, and they're a lot smaller plants, a 5-inch is definitely their appropriate size. I would not go to a 6-inch; it's to be too large. I wouldn't be able to drive that car as fast.
What's another scenario where a 5-inch would be beneficial? Maybe if you didn't have enough dehu?
Yeah. So obviously the larger pot size holds more water and evaporation of the water. So you could go down to a 5-inch there. I would still, if you're not set up for it and you're trying to grow a 5-inch in the room 2 with the 6-foot plants, I would still personally do that. And but it could be worrisome as well.
Well, Kev, I think you wouldn't grow in anything because you've got an Arroyo sensor pretty much every
True.
square inch of this facility. So,
Yep. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Now, speaking of Arroyo, because we're literally tracking everything throughout the facility. One thing we haven't touched on is post-processing, right? And one of the cool tools that we have is the Aqua Lab. Touch a little bit on the Aqua Lab and why that's such a huge benefit.
Yeah, I think number one, it allows you to find a baseline of where you want your flower to be at when it goes into a package or whatever its final destination is. So you can get a baseline for whatever varieties you're growing. So and not all of them are the same, in the way some of the markets, people like spongy. So you might be able to fine tune your dry to get to that spongy nature. Not necessarily by controlling it at the end, but controlling it in the process. So you can find, okay, well, on day 7, if I tweak the dehus here, I can still get to that point and retain terps. But that data, you need that data to be able to quantify those levers to be able to turn.
You mean I can't just go 60-60 for 10 days and call it a day?
I mean, It's not optimal. You can. But I mean, generally, everybody kind of knows that as the guideline. But I think bud size, both good, big, small. You kind of have to tweak that program to be able to fit. In this day and age of everybody wanting, as best a quality as possible for a low price, we need to be able to have the data to back, to get that flower on a consistent basis. And really, if you have a brand, a retail brand, that's where it's going to be, most important.
That's one of the key things that I loved about being able to measure that water activity level. The range is, I believe, Kev, is what, 0.58 to 0.62, if I'm not mistaken?
I mean, it really depends on strain. I've seen a lot of down to 0.5 and still be fine. It really, a lot of it's the density of the flower. So I would say more like a 0.5 to 0.52, but really 0.55 to 0.6 is where you'd want to be, generally speaking, from my experience.
Okay. Now, and at that point, you're going into whether it's a terp lock bag, because I think we've experimented. Now, I do want to call out the terp lock bag versus just a traditional turkey bag, because I think, Kev, you and I have seen the benefit and longevity of holding the terp throughout, what are we on, 4 months now, I think? And one of the challenges that we saw, I don't know if you guys have seen the Turpy Lock bag, but it's got a little bit of a cloudiness to the actual bag itself. Now, if we can please educate our buyers and our brokers that cloudy bag is actually a good thing, because it's holding in the terpenes. And for some reason, we just kept having people make a comment about the bag, and for some reason, they just didn't understand that this is actually holding in the product quality.
Yeah. When you look at month-old flower and it retains its nose with little degradation, it kind of speaks for itself. But the traditional I wouldn't say the buyers, they see that opaque bag and it doesn't crinkle or it's not clear. It's kind of like, well, what do you this looks cheap. This looks like something that, I don't know, peanuts came from the UPS store. It's like, it just looks odd. So it's not well received, but it does work well.
It's not well received. And this blows my mind, because again, the nose coming out of these bags is ridiculous. Again, even after a month, 2 month, 3 month, now we're on month 4 and it's still holding that nose. So again, guys, this is a very important thing, because when we start looking at a branded product and how it retains its quality over the shelf life, especially when we go into retailers' environments that are not controlled, right? There's going to be a massive terp degradation. And again, I want to throw a shout out to Jack and JJ over at Grove Bags, because they've really developed something super cool and unique and special, especially when we're emphasizing so much on plant health and immunity and increasing the terpene to cannabinoid ratio. That is it's completing the wheel. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, we invest so much time in the growing of it. Definitely being able to preserve what we do post harvest is really important. And in a lot of these terp bags, the kind of the breathable style, they're already being used in in a retail type sense. It's just, what we're using it is in more of the turkey bag. So technology's been used. It's just kind of odd, when people see it. So it's not anything new. It's just kind of a new bag. Technology's been there.
Right. So if we can, cultivators, if you can help educate your buyers that these are good bags, I mean, that's something that really blows my mind, how people were judging it so hard. But I digress. We'll have more talk about post-production. We need to have a whole series on post-production, specifically because now that we've got the Aqualab tool, that we can really start to hone in these genetic recipes from a post-processing perspective. Let's touch real briefly on that, Kev. Trimming off the stem or bucking down?
Well, so I would prefer trimming on the stem, but you get a lot of pushback from your trimmers. It's less degradation, less touching. You can touch those buds, the better. So that would be what I would choose, and what we choose to do.
Any final thoughts on the Synganic program? Any best practice FYIs that we might want to recap, or just something we might have not touched on?
I think we touched on it, but if you're planning on putting organics through your emitters, just make sure your system with flush valves you have the proper system. If you have questions about that, reach out, because this program, you can get clogged emitters if you don't have the right SOPs, and so you need the right equipment for it. And they are all flowable, but not given the right SOPs and the right equipment, it makes it a lot more difficult to maintain your system to the proper specs without organics. So.
Cool. Anything else before we depart? Where can we get the products? Great question, Tony. So if you scan that QR code over on that PowrHouse tent, this is everything that you guys can. We're here to help, but there's a lot of information on there. We're here to help you guys get some commercial trials. Matt, I appreciate you always supporting that narrative, man, because we wouldn't be here without you, without Kevin, without Steve. Like, this is the whole thing, guys. We're doing this to help cultivators, and we're not here to sell products. We're here to provide solutions. So if you want to trial the solutions and then you decide to buy it, thank you. That's what we're here to do, guys. Not every farm's the same. Not every cultivator has the same ideology, but we're here to give you guys those solutions, those trialable applications. And we've got a dope facility here. Tyler, thank you for having us, man. The home of PowrHouse. I mean, this is really everything that we've been dreamed about. Been talking about this showroom for years now. And I remember Matt coming up at the Connect, just kind of poking at us. Hey, you guys are talking about cool stuff. When are we going to get an actual showroom going? And here we are, almost year and a half, 2 years later. It's pretty incredible to be here with you guys. And Kevin Vu, Steve Squagley, appreciate you guys for this love and support, always innovating. Shout out to all of our partners here, the PowrBrands. This is not stopping, guys. This is just the beginning. Thank you for making time to come out here today on a Friday, right before the holiday, making time to come out and see what we got cracking. You've been a part of this journey with us here, and now we're here to continue leveling up with each other. Love you guys. Appreciate you. Tony, thank you for hitting the switches on that dashboard, baby. Much love, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
unsafe sites. Before it's a problem, choose Chrome for built-in malware protection.
Yo, S-Boy, take a break.